Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse pour faire le point sur la situation au Québec quant à la COVID-19. Aujourd'hui, le Premier ministre du Québec, M. François Legault, est accompagné du ministre de la Santé et des Services sociaux, M. Christian Dubé, de la ministre déléguée au transport et ministre responsable de la métropole et de la région de Montréal, Mme Chantal Rouleau, et du directeur national de la santé publique, M. Horacio Arruda. M. Legault, à vous la parole.
Bonjour tout le monde. Écoutez, d'abord, je commence par vous dire que le masque que je porte aujourd'hui était fabriqué par deux designers québécoises qui sont mis ensemble pour la crise. Manika Godette de l'entreprise Manic et Carmen Popescu de l'entreprise Nemrac, que je trouve très beau. Bon, avant de vous parler de la situation...
Before I talk to you about the situation concerning the pandemic in Quebec, I want to take a few seconds to talk to you a little bit about the tragedy that we experienced this weekend with the two little girls, and to tell you how shocked I am, and I imagine that all Quebecers are shocked, as I am. Unfortunately, we haven't found the presumed aggressor.
Qu'il y a quelqu'un qui a l'air en détresse.
When somebody looks like they're in distress, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's responsible to call and to ask for help. And for parents, there's a phone line called Ligne Parent, 1-800-361-5085, 1-800-361-5085. So if anybody who's at the end of the rope, as we say, well, before doing something stupid, please call and ask for help. And there's no shame in getting support. I'm going to come back to the pandemic now. Perhaps to give you some context for the announcement that we're making today, I'd like to remind you that approximately 4 months ago, we asked Quebecers to stay home, except for essential services, to go to the grocery store, to the drugstore. We asked people to stay at home. And it worked well in Quebec. I know that we did not have good results in the CHSLDs, but when we look, apart from the 200,000 people that stay in CHSLDs, the rest of the population, 8.3 million people, it's here in North America that where people respected the directives the most. We accepted to stay home, and all of the experts that we have consulted have told us that thanks to this, we've saved thousands of lives because there was a lot less community transmission. So things were done correctly. When we saw a few months ago that the number of cases and the transmission was decreasing, the strategy that we chose was to move forward gradually, because now we are changing habits and behaviors of the population. For a long time, we have to be honest, we're not going to change the directives overnight, because we know that it's going to take a long time before we can get to a vaccine. So we asked, first of all, the measure that's the most important, we've asked everybody to stay 2 meters away from other people. It's a little bit as if we said to people, well, be half confined, but instead of everybody being at home alone, well, we are all 2 meters away from each other. And what we're realizing in surveys or in consultations with the population is that this measure is starting to be well integrated. People, even when they see their friends, they stay 2 meters away. They don't kiss each other or shake hands. So this measure, which is still the most important, is respected. One of the things that we also said, another directive we told people you can meet in houses, but you can't have more than 10 people at once. And to that effect, unfortunately, we are hearing that a lot of people are not respecting that 10-person limit. There are parties, 20, 30, 50, 60 people, barbecues. There's even some people who have decided that they were going to have big weddings. Now's not the time to have a big wedding. Now's not the time to have a party with more than 10 people. So we're repeating it. We haven't made many requests, but there are. We're not going to throw away all the work that we've done over the past 4 months because of a few people who want to have a big party. I understand that it's fun to have a big party, but you can have a good time with 10 friends, right? You can change friends every weekend, but we want to be within 10 people, a group of 10 people. So I'm repeating myself. This is very important. The other worry that we had since the beginning, and we can see this with what's happening in Florida and even in California, is bars. Obviously, when we take a drink or have 2 or 3 drinks even, we may want to get a little bit closer to others. So the Minister of Health last week put in place some new rules. So the bars close at 1 a.m. They're going to stop serving alcohol at midnight, 50% capacity. So there are some rules that were put in place. And last weekend, there were 600 inspections. So we've got people from the CNESST and some people from public health who did 600 inspections. And I was very pleased because the report that we got, we were told that people respected 2 meters. And that's wonderful. I want to take this opportunity because I know that it was difficult news to accept for bar owners last week, but I want to say to the bar owners today, thank you. We had a nice weekend. I mean, we're going to continue. We should have more inspections next weekend. And we've got the construction holiday starting next weekend, so there's going to be even more people who are going to feel like they're on vacation, so we're going to continue, and we will not hesitate. I don't want to just have empty threats, but bars, this is a strategic piece of it. In many places, in many states, transmission occurs in bars, so we want to be very vigilant. But if we continue to respect the measures that were put in place, we'll be able to move forward. Now, I want to talk to you about masks. Once again, there are some people who say, why did you not make it mandatory before? The important point was, first of all, the 2 meters. This had to become a habit. People have to keep 2 meters away from each other. And we went forward gradually. We said when you leave the house, when you go in a public space, we strongly recommend that you wear a mask. And after a few weeks, we said, as of today, in public transportation, metros, buses, etc., you must wear a mask. It's mandatory, and there will be some people who will control this. Now, over the past week, we are seeing that the number of cases has increased slightly, and we can see that there is community transmission. So the cases are not just in the CHSLDs and in the RPAs. Public health is telling us that there is community transmission, which is starting. We're not yet at a stage where it's worrisome, but we have to be vigilant, and we don't want it to continue to increase. And this weekend, or next weekend, we've got the construction holiday starting. We know in Quebec, it's not just people who work in construction. There's a lot of people who take their vacation at the end of the month of July. That's where we've got the greatest chances of having nice weather in Quebec. And I like this because Quebecers are vacationing in Quebec. They're going to go visit other regions in Quebec, but there's going to be a lot of travel between regions. So it's going to be a kind of a big soup, pardon the expression, where Quebecers will travel about. And
Le virus,
the virus,
la COVID, là,
the COVID virus, doesn't take any time off.
il est toujours là.
It's always there.
Et donc, c'est pour ça qu'aujourd'hui,
And that is why today
on va vers une autre étape.
we're moving on to the next step, and I'm announcing officially
C'est donc de
that
samedi,
as of next Saturday, the 18th of July,
masque va être
masks will be made mandatory everywhere in Quebec in all indoor public places like businesses and shops. There are some people who say, well, what does that mean exactly, public, indoor public places? Does that include restaurants? Yes, it includes restaurants.
comique qui disent,
And now there are some jokers who will say, well, how can we eat if we're wearing a mask?
la situation, là,
The situation, you wear a mask, right, when you're moving about. Once you are seated, and it's the same thing
spectacle,
in a showroom, let's say. Once you're seated
on est à 2 mètres.
and 2 meters away from other people, or we're at a table with people who are with us,
Maximum 10.
maximum of 10, of course,
On peut l'enlever son
well, then we could take off the mask.
Par contre,
However,
quand on se lève,
when we get up
soit à
to go to the washroom or to leave the restaurant, we put the mask back on because now there's a risk
d'être à moins de 2 mètres
of being
personne, puis en
at less than 2 meters from other people. And why do we say indoor public places? Because there are more and more studies that demonstrate that there is an increased risk when we're inside rather than outside.
très important
So it's very important
respecter.
to respect this new rule.
Dans un premier temps, on va
Now, first of all, we're going to do some awareness raising. Yes,
les amendes
there will be some fines
posées
that will be imposed
les propriétaires de commerce
by shop owners,
entre 400
fines between $400 and $6,000
pour les personnes
for people
12 ans et plus.
age 12 and over. Children 2 to 12, we strongly suggest that they wear the mask, but it is not mandatory
D'amende.
and there will be no fines.
Effectivement,
And we will actually count
sur les propriétaires de
on shop owners
faire appliquer
to make sure that the new rule is respected, and if it's not respected, to give fines.
1er août,
As of the 1st of August,
de la santé
the Ministry of Health
en train de regarder
is now looking
des amendes
so that there can also be fines for individuals that do not respect the rules. Because we can't put all of the onus
de commerce
on shop owners, but we are starting with shop owners, and then afterwards,
vers les individus.
there will be fines to individuals. Our objective is not to give fines. Our objective is that everybody collaborates, and out of solidarity, Quebecers will say, well, out of respect for others,
Je vais m'assurer
I will make sure
transmettre,
that I don't transmit the virus, so I will wear a mask.
je le répète,
And I'm repeating myself here.
pas mieux porter un
It's better to wear a mask
de retourner au confinement
than to be confined at
à
home
la maison, chacun
and that
chez soi.
everybody is, back home and alone and confined. So I understand that it's summertime, it's vacation time.
Porter un masque,
It's not fun wearing a mask,
c'est primordial
but it's essential so that we can
pour revenir.
not go back to confinement. And as I've already said,
J'aime pas quand j'entends des
I don't
gens
like when I hear people say,
dire peureux de porter
oh, you look like you're a chicken when you wear a mask. When we wear a mask, we're not afraid. We are respectful. We're making sure that we don't transmit the virus to other people.
et
And
le virus
the virus, as we know,
c'est la transmettre.
is easily transmitted. If you're close to a person, it's easy to transmit. So we have to be more intelligent than the virus. So I'm asking all Quebecers, please,
Quand vous allez dans un
when you go into a shop, when you go in the metro, on the bus, please wear a mask.
bon, il y a des personnes
There are some people,
j'ai entendu des personnes
I heard some people,
c'est ça comme ça,
I'll say it that way,
parler de liberté.
talk about freedom.
Un masque,
Oh, wearing a mask goes against our freedoms.
aujourd'hui, dans le contexte
Today, in the context of the pandemic, freedom is to be able to walk around in Quebec,
dans les commerces,
to go into shops,
et la pandémie,
despite the pandemic. So wearing a mask, that's what freedom is. If tomorrow morning the virus erupts again and that we have to confine everybody at home,
c'est pas ça.
that is not freedom. So freedom,
Contexte actuel.
in the current context, is wearing a mask.
Donc, je termine en vous disant,
I'm going to end by saying
demande,
that I'm asking for a special effort. I'm asking all Quebecers to collaborate.
on a besoin
We need to respect the 2 meters, no more than 10 people when we do a barbecue or when we have a party at home, and when we go into a shop, on a bus, in the metro, we wear a mask. So in closing, I would like to wish all Quebecers a wonderful summer. I hope that you can enjoy some good times with your friends, but while remaining responsible, and I'm truly counting on all of you. A few words in English.
I like to start by reminding everyone that gatherings of more than 10 people in homes or in yards are prohibited. It's 10 maximum. We're not going to put all Quebec at risk because of a few big parties. I'm also announcing today that masks will be mandatory in all closed public places, such as shops, everywhere in Quebec, starting on July 18. Shops owner will be responsible for enforcing this rule. Everyone aged 12 and over will have to wear a mask. The only exceptions are people with specific medical conditions. Business owners who fail to enforce this mask requirement will be subject to fines of $400 to $6,000 for offenses. I ask all Quebecers to wear a mask in shops and in public transportation. The COVID-19 virus is really dangerous. It's easy to catch when you're close to another person. Let's be careful and wear a mask to stay safe. I wish all Quebecers a great summer. Let's stay responsible. I count on you all. Thank you.
Perhaps something that I forgot, I may have skipped it in French. There's an exception for people who have specific medical conditions and who can't wear a mask. There will be an exception for these people. We will begin the question period. There are 2 microphones in the room. 1 question per reporter. First question.
Bonjour à vous quatre.
Hello. Mr. Legault, it seemed inevitable to impose masks. We know that there are several municipalities who have already imposed it in the past few days. Montreal had said that they would impose it on the 27th of July. We're not going to name them all, but did you feel a bit of pressure from municipalities, from citizens, and that's why you're introducing this today? No, not at all. This scenario, we've had it in mind for a long time. The idea was to go gradually. The idea was to say, let's make sure that there's buy-in with our directives, and let's make sure that the 2 meters is respected, and let's look at the number of cases. And unfortunately, over the past week, we're seeing, even if there's a stabilization and a slight decrease in the number of hospitalizations, there's an increase in the number of cases, and there is community transmission. So perhaps a measure that we could have put in place in September, we're going to put it in place now. But this was next in the sequence. We never excluded making masks mandatory throughout Quebec. And we are the first province to do so. There's no other province who has made masks mandatory throughout their province elsewhere in Canada.
Bonjour à vous tous.
Hello. I've got a question from a colleague. To get some details on all of this, I was wondering what qualifies an indoor public place? For example, showrooms, concert rooms. Is that included in that? For example, will actors or stand-up comics have to wear a mask on the stage? Can you give us some more details on this? You have to understand that the measure is for the population and not for workers. You have to understand that workers are managed by guides that were published with public health, etc., So the directives for people on stage, that's settled. For example, when you go to a retail store, when you go to a pharmacy, when you go into a drugstore, or when you're waiting in the doctor's office, it's all the places that are enclosed or that are public. We're talking about public places where you're going to happen upon other people, and there are some risks at being at less than 2 meters. Now, for workers, for people in the restaurant, people who work in construction, that is managed by guys. But when they leave the workplace and they travel about, they become citizens like you and I. In a showroom, we know that people will be able to move about. When they go into the showroom, they can gather to go inside, so they wear the mask, and when they sit down in their seat, which is a defined zone, then if they're not singing, etc., they can take off their mask. They can keep it on, that's not a problem, but they can take it off if they wish. That's the rule. Mr. Legault, I'd like to hear what you have to say about the wave of disclosures for sexual violence that we're seeing on the internet, that we've seen on the internet over the past few days and weeks. For several experts, the importance is to improve sex ed classes in schools in Quebec. What do you suggest? Now that it's 5 hours in elementary school per year, if I'm not mistaken, that's 15 hours of sex ed in high schools. Do you want to increase the number of hours of classes? First of all, I want to salute the people who had the courage to report assaults, because it helps make everybody more aware. It's too bad that this is how it's unfolding, but I want to salute their courage. And Simon Jolin Barrette, the Minister of Justice, is looking at how it can be less difficult for victims to report, and how when they're before the courts, that they don't have to experience the assault all over again before the courts. Now, sex ed classes are part of everything that's looked at by Jean-François Roberge in education. Currently, I've given a mandate to Isabelle Charret for everything that has to do with violence against women, harassment, and there's a part that starts through basic education, including sex ed, but it's broader than that, the question of violence, of respect and equality between men and women, amongst others. So there are many ministries that are concerned by this, and Isabelle Charret currently is working on this, but all ministers, whether it's education or justice ministers. And I encourage people who have been victims of harassment to denounce their aggressors. Hello, everybody. Hello, Mr. Premier. As to fines, there's a pretty significant gap. You're talking about a first fine of $400 and it goes up to $6,000. What justifies a fine of $400 up to $6,000? You were talking about inspectors who worked in the field in bars last week. Do you expect that police officers will go through retail stores, for example? Once again, there's a scale, right? At the beginning, it's going to be warnings. After, the fines may be closer to $400. And if they don't respect, once again, then we're going to increase the amount. We can double it, a few times until we get to $6,000. That's the idea. The idea is to go gradually. But at the beginning, we've got some people from public health and the CNESST. If there's a fine to be given, the police officers can get involved. But honestly, I really hope that Quebecers will do what they did in the first few months of the pandemic, and that is that they will be disciplined and that they will do it out of respect for others, because we can imagine that if just about everybody wears a mask in a shop, if there's one person who comes into the shop and they're not wearing a mask, well, I think they're going to get looked at, right, if everybody else is wearing a mask. So societal discipline is very strong as well, and we have to get used to it. It's not going to be different in 2 months and probably not even in 6 months. So this is a new habit in Quebec to wear a mask when we go into a shop. So there's going to be more and more people who will wear them, and we hope that people quickly will get on board. But there has to be pressure, like some kind of peer pressure. Hello. You defined who's in the workplace and who is a citizen, let's say. Who is an employer? Is it transport companies? Will they be fined if they let somebody on a bus, for instance, who's not wearing a mask? Who is the employer in your definition? Well, when it's a private business, it's the owner of the business. That's quite simple. In transportation companies, well, in the metro, it's the people who are at the wicket. We ask them to stop people and tell them they have to wear a mask. But I understand that there's unions that are contesting all of this. But technically, on buses, it's the bus driver. So it would be up to them to impose. For the time being, we're talking about fines for owners of shops and businesses. Does that mean that a shop where they have a client who's not wearing a mask, they can call the police and throw them out? How will this work? Well, first of all, they have to communicate with the person to tell them that they can't come in because they're not wearing a mask. And secondly, if the person does not want to leave the shop, they can call the police. But that's the work that we're expecting from shop owners, right? And at the STM, there's a grace period until the 27th of July. Has that been moved forward so that it can coincide with the new directives? No, because we also want, in shops, we want there to be an awareness-raising period. Hello. A question for clarifications concerning people who have medical conditions that prevent them from wearing a mask. Will they have to have proof on them? Or can anybody who says that they have a medical condition, do we believe them? Or do you have any examples of special medical conditions that could lead to an exemption? People who can't wear a mask are often people who have cardiac issues or respiratory issues. And I think that usually it's as of a certain age, right? We're not going to ask people to walk around with a medical certificate. I think it's clear that we're not going to ask that. Let's take an example. People who are handicapped, who can't put the mask on themselves and take it off, these are people who will have an exemption. It's going to be up to judgment, personal judgment, right? For example, a young person who decides to say, well, I've got a big respiratory problem and I don't want to wear a mask. Well, it's not because you've got a bit of asthma that you can't wear a mask, but often people have other signs, in the way that they walk, for example, because they've got a pulmonary capacity that's limited, et cetera. So it's going to be up to people's judgment. And if you'll allow me, once again, I want to insist, if we ask you for this, it's for you, the population, and your greatest contribution to decreasing the transmission of the virus is to collaborate. I would also ask those who are in the population to collaborate with shops and operators, because they had to make some efforts to put in place some new ways of doing things in their businesses. And the least we can do out of respect for them, out of respect for shop owners, and also for healthcare workers who are coming out of a period that was quite intense, and with a second wave that could arrive or that we could create ourselves because we can't respect physical distancing, it would not be easy to get through. Mobilization will be tougher, and we don't want people to die from this. But the greater the number of cases, the greater the chance of having complications. Clarification. So this fall, would this have an impact on high school CEGEP universities, the mandatory masks? Well, for high schools, this is managed through the school, depending on the zones, but it's not specifically for high schools. But for CEGEPs and universities, it is when people are traveling from one place to another. In a class, for example, we could take off the mask to be able to, follow our class, especially since we're at a distance from others. The universities will have directives of this nature. Now, for children in elementary school, as we've said, they're not. This is not for them either, because we recommend it for kids from 2 to 12, but it's not mandatory. However, the Ministry of Education, depending on the context, the transportation context, etc., they could supply some masks, but it's not the clientele that is targeted right now by this new measure. It says of CEGEP and university only. You spoke earlier about parties with 30, 40 people. How worried are you about this situation? And do you want the police to intervene more? Well, I'm very concerned by this. And this is one of the things that we're talking about. If we close down bars, what's going to happen is that there's going to be gatherings in private homes where young people have a party. So there's a balance to be achieved here. This is why we're talking about a maximum of 10 people, because gatherings in a house, often people don't have the reflex to keep their distance, and nobody, and in bars, it's not easy either. I'm not saying that it's easy in a bar, but there are some rules. And most of the inspections that were carried out this weekend were, it was adequate. People are really making an effort. So make an effort on your end, and don't have parties with 50, 30, above 10, it's not allowed. I don't know if Mr. Premier wanted to add something, or the Minister of Health. We talked about this earlier last week, but I would tell you that it's before and after bars. Often, we're creating a link here, and over the past few days, we're going to go into deeper analysis to see what caused these additional cases, to see if they are linked to the bars, to the private parties. So we're going to put a lot of emphasis on this, because we realize that the gatherings of 10 people or more were one of the main reasons for the spreading of the virus. So we're going to put a lot of emphasis on this in the next few days, and we will keep you informed so that we can give you some explanations of the stats, etc. So gatherings of 10 people or more, and that's why we want to be very, very clear. We will not accept these gatherings, because this is one of the main sources of outbreaks. And people have confused the 50 in closed rooms as being acceptable in private homes. Now, it's vacation time is coming up. Please don't have parties with more than 10 people, especially from one region to the next with people traveling. This is a way of making the virus explode. I'm sorry, Horatio, but I would also say the clarification, and thank you for the question. I said before and after bars, but inside and outside of homes. It's not because you're in the backyard that you can have more than 10 people. We really have to find a way to limit ourselves to 10 people so that physical distancing, including masks, can be respected. This is truly an important element that will help us win this fight.
Good afternoon. Dr. Ruda, could you give us an update on the situation with Montreal's bars? Have we found new outbreaks, and are the contract tracers able to find all the cases right now?
Actually, Montreal is making an inquiry, as other regions in Quebec, about all the cases. What we observe is that there is younger people from 15 to 29 persons, and have been some of those persons who have been in different bars. At least, actually, I've heard about 8 situations, but now they are trying to make the contact tracing. But it's very complicated, because also sometimes people don't tell where they have been. So it's why Saturday the Public Health Direction decided to make a screening of different bars to make sure that they will capture, I would say, people who could be asymptomatic but already having the disease, and control the, I would say, the situation. Actually, the situation is under control, but as it's more a preventive approach, very aggressive one that we told that we want to test in those periods of the confinement, the same way that if there is an outbreak in an industry, construction, or other places, we are going to make those tests available for that specific situation. And it's clear that sometimes also in Montreal, people go from one bar to another one, and then to another one in the same evening. So it's why it's more complex, and for nothing, and for trying to really catch up and control those situations. It's why this mass screening test is offered. And even I had the information that yesterday there were more people presenting to those places than suspected to come, because before that there was not people coming to testing, and they will adjust the offer of tests to the demand.
On va prendre la prochaine question.
Valeria Corey-Minocchio from CBC News. Before I ask my question, would it be possible, Premier Legault, just to repeat your message regarding the tragedy this weekend in English?
It's terrible what happened. Of course, we were shocked. I cannot believe that you can kill some children. I think about the mother, of course, of these two girls. And what I want to say also is that if you have trouble, if you don't feel under control, or if you see somebody close to you being not in control, having difficulties, you don't have to be shy. You have to call, and there's a line called Ligne Parent, 1-800-361-5085. You have to do something when you see that you're in trouble before doing something terrible like what happened. And I want to say also that the police people will do all what's possible to find the responsible.
On to my question now, regarding bars. In Montreal, there have been like bumps of COVID-19 cases in connection to bars, and all over, in most countries in the world, drinking establishments are considered more likely for outbreaks and transmission. So I guess what I'm asking is, why is it so important to open bars in the province when we know that they are perhaps a riskier place to be?
Maybe I can start with that. There's two things. I think when we opened on June 25th, we had certain rules, and we've seen what happened in the last 2 weeks. And therefore, what we have done, we said, if we want to keep the bar open, we need to be more restrictive on certain measures. And I think the message has been understood. We will see, as the Premier has said very clearly, we had more than 600 visits during the weekend, more than that, but roughly in excess of 600. And we're pleased with the initial result. What I think we're concerned is before those measures were in place, and that's what Dr. Arruda said, and I'm repeating, before those measures had been put in place, there are certain bars when we've seen, discovered some of those contagious. So what we're trying to make sure is we're saying, are those cases where it did happen in 8 bars, did they happen before we had those new measures? And this is the reason that the next week, and I'm putting a very clear restriction on time, I want to see the evolution on the number of cases. Remember last week when we announced the measure, I said we were, for a few days, in excess of 100. And this is a mobile average that we follow. We're still in that 100. Today was 100, yesterday was just a bit over 100. So we'll monitor very closely, especially with bars. If we were to see that the measure that we have announced are not sufficient, or if we see bar owners that are not respecting the rules, we'll act accordingly. But I think we need to give the benefit of the doubt. I think what we've seen this weekend, this last weekend, was very encouraging. But I'll tell you, as I mentioned last week, we will closely monitor that. Now, that's the reason the Premier has said over the next weekend, which is the first weekend of the construction holiday, we're still going to have those inspectors monitoring and looking at all the bars, just to make sure that those measures are being implemented. And if they're not, as I mentioned, we'll act accordingly. But I think we give them the benefit of the doubt. And I just want to say, as the Premier has said very clearly, we see that our message has been understood not only from the bar owners, but from the population. So let's see that we are reasonable. I think we've seen that, but we'll monitor that very, very closely in the coming days.
And just on masks.
Quickly.
Yes. Did you feel like pressure? You know, Montreal's like announced mandatory masks, so have other municipalities on the South Shore. Did you as the province just feel pressure to do so?
Well, I think the Premier has answered that very clearly earlier. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can repeat what I just said. I think it was part of the different scenarios we are looking for since many weeks now. Of course, the number of cases maybe accelerate this measure, but it was part of the potential scenarios. Like just said also, it's not impossible in the next few weeks that we close bars. It's part of our different scenarios. But if the situation remains under control, we'll keep them open. But if the situation deteriorates, we may have had other scenarios.
Thank you.
Good.
Good afternoon, Amanda Klein with CTV. Mr. Legault, we spoke to the Quebec Retail Council this morning, who says that they've already had to implement a number of safety measures to reopen. They're overwhelmed. They have a lot to pay for. The STM has said that they don't want to play mask police. The Retail Council is saying, we don't want to enforce this. We don't want to have the responsibility. Why not? If you're facing so much opposition from people not wanting to take on this responsibility to enforce this rule, why not just give it to Montreal Police or the SQ to enforce?
Because the police cannot be in all shops at the same time. So we need our eyes to be the owners. But like I said, starting on August 1st, we don't exclude at this time to give some penalties also to the people, to the individuals. But right now, in order to make sure that the new rule is applied, we need the collaboration of the owners of the shops. And at the beginning, it will be more some information. We'll make sure that it's applied by them. But if somebody is not in good faith and accept to continue having individuals without masks, then we'll give the owner penalties.
Next question.
Along the same lines, though, how is it fair to ask, young, low-paid retail workers to enforce something like this? And what is your advice to them? What do you suggest they do if someone refuses to put on a mask when coming in?
Okay, first, I hope that we don't need to enforce, that the Quebecers understand that that's life for many months. And we have to have this new habit of wearing a mask when you're in a shop. So that's my goal. But we need the collaboration of the shop's owner. We need them to at least inform the clients, the customers, that they have to wear a mask. And we need their collaboration. And if we don't have their collaboration, it means that they don't respect the law, and we'll have to give them some penalties.
But I'm saying, if a customer refuses, should a shop worker call police?
No. They call the police. They don't have to have somebody with big arms doing the job. They can call the police, and the police will do the job.
This is like a 3-second question. I just wanted to know if is it ages 12 and over have to wear masks, or is it over the age of 12? I wasn't sure what was.
Merci. C'est fini.
Merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good holiday.
Émilie, as-tu assez de photos avec nos masques, là?